So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now, I haven't got a vendetta against Patanjali. I just think we have to use him appropriately and reasonably in the way that we're living life, right? So we've got to remember first of all that Patanjali and his Yoga Sutras was written for a monastic setting. Right? It was written for a very high level of spiritual aspirant that was really decided not to live material life anymore. To put it bluntly, really have decided to devote all their life to spirituality. Now, can we honestly say we're doing that? If we can't say that we're doing that, then maybe we have to take Patanjali accordingly to degree. So the amount that we are doing that, or the amount that we're living worldly life, there's still a lot of lessons to be learned from Patanjali, but maybe we don't want to do the whole thing as Patanjali envisages it, because in the end, Patanjali is really suggesting that we're pulling the plug on our identity and our normal mind. We're becoming pretty much inured to pleasure and to pain, to absorb ourselves in the kind of general mind, to absorb that mind back into the stratosphere, as it were, or into God, or however we want to frame it. But that's what he's aiming for. And let's be honest, are we really aiming for that? Do we really want that? Right? So we have to, I think, ask ourselves these serious questions, because in order to work effectively, we have to be aware of the level that we want to work at. Now, if we're thinking that we're aiming up here with Patanjali because we feel we ought to be aiming up there, then we can't really do the effective work because we're not working honestly, right? So we can't really do the work where we are. So where are we? Or where do we want to be, right? If we're living in the material world still, it presupposes that we want to be living in the material world. Otherwise we wouldn't be. We would have found that monastery and we would be leading that life of Patanjali where we're basically trying to transcend the world and ourselves and our identities altogether, but we're not trying to transcend ourselves or our individual identities, right? We're trying to be more peaceful and more happy in them. So let's probably be honest with ourselves. That's how we could use Patanjali, and he has many lessons in terms of living more harmoniously with the world and ourselves, right? So what are those lessons? First of all, we say his aim is no mind. Yes, that's true, but his aim is also, the take-home points are a relationship with mind, right? The way that he suggests that we relate to mind is the question, and it doesn't mean we have to follow him all the way to no mind. We can just follow him down the road to understanding the idea of deep mind. The idea of deep mind meaning that the mind has residue attached to it, that when we act, we create a kind of emotional effect inside us that goes on longer than the act itself and dictates our next actions, and dictates our next emotions, right? A deep mind that makes imprints, that lays down imprints, right? So the superficial mind suggests that we have free will, utter kind of 50-50 choice, in each and every moment, but we don't because of deep mind. And Patanjali nicely points out this what was a modern psychological idea, right? That every action lays down a kind of residue, and that affects the next action. So we want to be aware of the action and not only because we don't want to do harmful things probably, but mainly for Patanjali, it's not a morality he's suggesting. He's suggesting we don't want to do actions that aren't useful, helpful, good, right, because we don't want to suffer the personal implications in the residue that it lays down in us, right? So he's not really saying that we need to act morally for the sake of it, and that, I think, is where one of the key kind of misinterpretations of the Yoga Sutras comes in, that this Ashtanga Yoga that we get taught on the TTs, etc., just emphasizes the yamas like a newfangled 10 commandments, right or wrong. We need to live a truthful life, we need to live a non-harmful life. Sure, those things are necessary, right? But they're necessary for Patanjali, not because he's prescribing a new morality, a social morality. Remember the monastics living in the monastery, they didn't need a morality because they weren't living in a society. So they were using these principles to keep the consciousness clean, right? But that's what Patanjali's aiming for. He's aiming at he's teaching two types of yoga here. One is Raja Yoga, the yoga of meditation, right? And he gets onto that as he progresses. Well, actually, chapter 1 and chapter 4 particularly talk about this Raja Yoga. And then 2 and 3 perhaps are talking more about Kriya Yoga, which is basically a Hatha Yoga really, or yoga of technique. Kriya means a doing or technique. And he's talking there about methodologies that can actually physically change the system so it can understand itself more deeply. So two facets to his teaching, I suppose. One is Raja Yoga, the yoga of meditation. Another is action yoga, Kriya, from kara, the verb to do, which means that, some kind of active, not a meditation, right? So there's Hatha Yoga in there. It doesn't get much of a mention. Going back to the original point, let's be clear about what we're doing, and then let's be clear about our aims, what we really want to get out of this. Meditation and Kriya Yoga are all good, but are we really wanting to get to the state of Abhinirvisha? So Abhinirvisha is not clinging to life whatsoever. So when Patanjali mentions the 5 poisons, the 5 kleshas, he says it's ignorance, ego, desire, aversion, and clinging to one's own life. Now, do we really want to be desireless, to be passionless in life, right? Sure, we want to be less averse to circumstances, right? Less fearful, less hateful. But do we also want to be completely passionless? Right? We have to ask ourselves this question. Maybe you do. Maybe you want to sacrifice any fear and hatred and sacrifice passion in the same way. And maybe then you don't want to even hold on to your life whatsoever. It doesn't mean you're suicidal, but I think let's be reasonable about what Patanjali is asking here. And we can take it and use it, but we take it to degrees on a practical level as much as we want to, as much as we can be passive in terms of not reacting to circumstances and not being averse to any circumstance happening. Then only can we be passive about our desires, right? They go together, desire and aversion. Two sides of the same coin, right? So other take-home points. 3 qualities he suggests for spiritual development. One is faith, right? We have to believe in what we're doing. We probably have to believe in the teacher. The other is, so that's faith, shraddha. The other is virya, means effort, means determination. You have to be consistently determinated. Terminator. And the other is reflection. Shraddha, virya, smriti. It means memory. Like to reflect upon what we're doing, to have some self-consciousness around the kind of actions that we're doing, and if they work, if they don't work. So some kind of methodology, right? So you need to, because just making effort's no good. Just pushing in one direction as hard as we can is no good. We have to be quite skillful about the way that we're doing it, right? So shraddha, virya, smriti, faith, effort, and finally the memory, the reflection. So the effort is skillful effort, right? Not just effort, because effort on its own can be not that helpful, as we know, right? It has to be guided by thought. And this faith, now what does this faith mean? We'll get onto that later. Patanjali does talk about this Ishvara Pranidhana, giving pranams, giving oblations, devoting, bowing to God. Ishvara. But Ishvara doesn't necessarily mean God in the way that we think of God, perhaps in the Western world, in the Christian mentality that some of us, many of us, or let's say the Judo-Christian or monotheistic tradition that we've been brought up in, or it's been socialized within. God doesn't have the same attributes for Patanjali. God is a principle for the Yoga Sutras of concentration. He's the divine Purusha. He's the ultimate spirit, right? We're also the Atman Purusha. He's like the daddy spirit, the kind of special spirit. And funnily enough, Patanjali doesn't say we ought to devote to this spirit, we ought to worship the spirit. He says we use this spirit, we make pranams, we devote to this spirit for the sake of discovering our own spirit. So he's kind of, in a way, I don't want to say mercenary, but there's not a devotional quality, right? There's faith, there's focus on Ishvara, but the focus on Ishvara isn't a bhakti focus. We never find this loving devotional relationship kind of encouraged by Patanjali. It's the focus of one-pointed concentration. So this is the other one of the other take-home points that we're looking at here yoga, what is it? Or Kriya Yoga, as Patanjali says. Kriya Yoga is concentration, really, for Patanjali. Concentration on one point, right? Simply putting one's mind on one point, right? That encourages this reflection. When the mind is fairly stilled, it encourages reflection, right? And you need effort. It takes effort to be putting it on that one point, right? And it takes faith to continue it. So we see how all the themes are interwound, right? So this one-pointed concentration, ekagrata, one-pointed, it means we have to put our mind on something that's most important for us to keep it there. And for many people, that's the divine principle, the ultimate principle of God. So he uses it accordingly. Right? He uses it accordingly, but it's for the sake of self-understanding, this concentration. And what happens then? Well, the mind then becomes steady. The mind becomes steady and becomes withdrawn into the self. So stability is the ultimate quality of yoga practice that Patanjali drives at. He says, when he's talking about asana, he's talking about stability of practice, right? It's the stability that he's looking for. He's not talking about accomplishment or special states of hyper-consciousness. Well, later maybe he is, but primarily the foundational point is the concentration is for the sake of stability. Right? And the asana or any other Kriya Yoga techniques, because it's not just asana that's Kriya Yoga. You've got the breathing techniques, you've got the behavioural techniques, right? They're all aiming at this stability, right? And why? Why are we looking for that, right? What's good about stability? Well, stability is there because we're trying to separate the drug from the I've forgotten the other word for this. The drug is the seer from the seen, right? The drishta, I think maybe that is. So there's one particular sutra I'm thinking of, where he says, well, what is, and not just one, but he says, what you want to do is separate the seer, the person seeing, from what is seen, right? So, and this gives us a bit of objectivity. This gives us a bit of perspective in modern terms. We could all do with this, right? This is completely practical. Don't be stuck up against reality like you're licking a pane of glass, right? Because anything that happens then, you'll just be reacting to it. You put some space between the seer and realize you're not what you see. There's a seer, and then there's the world outside that's being seen. And the two things are different. And what Patanjali is trying to get us to realize is the seer is always impartial, always at peace, always unaffected. And the seen, in the seen world, in the world of matter, all kinds of stuff happens, right? But that doesn't affect the seer. Right? So he's trying to allow us the space to pull back, the objectivity, the sense of perspective, to get a little bit further away from circumstances and see, actually, when you take a second look, then they're maybe not what they seem, right? That there's a sense of being, a sense of peace that's greater than getting any circumstantial achievements for ourselves, right? And this is the ultimate place he's going with all this, and how far we follow him is up to us. Do we want to merge with the absolute? Do we want to transcend life? Is this what we're looking for? Are we in a monastic setting whereby this is a possibility? Or do we have family commitments and have to live in life? We have to live in life, so use Patanjali's sutras effectively, reasonably, practically, right? And get away, I think, finally, from this moralistic idea that Patanjali is a kind of Indian version or an esoteric version of our Ten Commandments, our kind of moral, social precepts, right? He's not. He's using these things simply to keep the mind and spirit clear. Now, of course, we have to act in a reasonable way in life to each other. This is necessary for our own peace of mind, for our own happiness, and because inherently, at a certain point in time, one realizes that one shares the same commonality with everyone else, and just as one self doesn't want to be in suffering, pain, the other person doesn't want to be either. Nevertheless, we have to realize that Patanjali is using these precepts, these yamas, these niyamas, and also when he talks about, in more slightly Buddhist terms, mudita, karuna, upeksanam, sutra, where he's saying you contact someone who's doing a good deed, then you're equanimous. A bad deed, you're not blameworthy of that. Give compassion where it's needed. There's a couple of sutras that very much are kind of more seemingly Buddhist flavor to them, right? Where he's seemingly recommending compassion and kindness as a practice, but no. Patanjali is simply using these practices to keep the mind clean. Right? See, the mind is disturbed by raga and dvesha, by passion and aversion. And so if we simply try and keep equanimous, try and keep a balance or equanimity out there by acting according to a social morality that basically honors everyone's values and everyone's peace of mind and everyone's freedom to be living a life without harm, then really we affect our deep mind and we don't get into more trouble laying down residue in our deep mind, because this will happen otherwise. Anyway, let me know what you think, as always. If you like this video, subscribe, notify, or whatever else you do on YouTube, hit the chat bell or whatever. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.